Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Leading the Charge, Policy and Design for EV Adoption. My name is Twyla Neely-Strite, and I'm the Education and Operations Associate here at Illinois Green. Today's program was put on by the Illinois Green Alliance Programs Committee, a volunteer group that coordinates education events throughout the year, covering a wide range of topics for the green building industry. The team that coordinated today's event consists of Dan Mooring, Sydney Van Kuren, and Tom Dietz. You have all been muted upon entry, so please type any questions you have into the Q&A and we will get them answered at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out in a follow-up email along with any additional resources, additional unanswered questions, and a copy of the slides. Illinois Green Alliance is a member-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. Our 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. We achieve this work through educational events such as panels and web building tours, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. Members can view our recorded webinars on our on-demand webinar library. Learn more about membership, see upcoming events, and get involved by visiting our website, illinoisgreenalliance.org. And I want to take a moment to recognize Illinois Green Alliance's sustaining sponsors who make our work possible. A special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, Resource Innovations, USGBC, and Sloan. Make a commitment to advancing green buildings in communities across the state. Start a conversation about sponsor partnership today at illinoisgreenalliance.com/sponsorship. I'd also like to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Powering Chicago, an electrical industry labor management partnership that brings together the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 134 Electricians, and the Electrical Contractors Association of Chicago and Cook County. Their new EV Charger ebook, developed by local electrical experts, will help provide a properties approach to electrification. Powering Chicago's Director of Operations, Carrie Spaeth, will be sharing copies at the in-person charging tour later this evening at 5:30 at 333 North Green, and the ebook along with other Powering Chicago resources will be sent out to all attendees next week in our follow-up email. And now I'd like to hand it over to Sydney, our moderator.
Thank you, Twyla. On behalf of our EV Programs Committee, I would like to welcome you to our session today. My name is Sydney Van Kuren, a Senior Associate at Muse Community and Design, and I will be your moderator today. Muse is a woman-owned urban planning and engagement firm that focuses on equity, transportation, and community resilience projects in the Chicago region and beyond. While equity and resilience are always sustainable, we are currently in the process of growing our sustainability-focused work, including work on equitable EV siting. My background is in sustainable urban development, so I am looking forward to bringing together my passions for decarbonization and equitable planning in this session all about EVs. Before we get started, I want to recognize my fellow EV program partner and lead, Daniel Mooring, for shepherding this session. Dan is a project manager at Slipstream, where he works to promote efficiency and equity in the built environment. A recovering policy wonk and aspiring practitioner, his favorite electric vehicle is the L. I love that. We have a great lineup of speakers for today's program. Edith Makra directs sustainability initiatives for the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, a coalition of 275 mayors in the greater Chicago region. Edith developed the Greenest Region Compact, a consensus sustainability pledge now adopted by 152 Chicago area communities, forming the largest regional municipal sustainability collaborative in the US. She has led the creation of the first climate action plan for the Chicago region and is now leading municipalities to prepare for transportation electrification. Jane Wilberding is a senior mobility manager at HNTB in Chicago, where she manages curbside management, emerging mobility, and complete streets projects across the country. In addition to her work with HNTB, she serves on the board of the Parking Reform Network, where she collaborates and advocates for more livable cities through implementing and improving parking reform programs and policies. Matt Ayers is the account executive who covers Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa for ChargePoint, which operates an online network of independently owned charging stations. Prior to ChargePoint, Matt has been working in the electric vehicle industry since 2015, where he worked for Tesla in various capacities across the Chicagoland area. Matt has been at ChargePoint for almost 2 years and has had the opportunity to work with large utilities, Fortune 500 customers, parking operators, and successfully navigating large RFPs. He is responsible for all municipal and commercial EV charging opportunities outside of auto dealerships and large commercial fleets and e-buses. So welcome to all of our wonderful panelists. Now that we have introduced our speakers, let's introduce ourselves through this icebreaker Zoom poll. Get folks thinking about EV. Twyla, if you could launch the poll, that would be great. We want to hear from you without looking it up, and regardless of whether you are currently an EV owner, can you tell us where the nearest charging station is to your home or work? A couple choices here. Maybe you know for sure it's conveniently close. Maybe you know, but it's too far away to be something you would use. Maybe you think you know of one, or maybe you just have no idea. So we would love to have everybody chime in and tell us what you think.
And I'm not sure if you all can see the poll results. I can say them out for you. We're getting,
Yeah, Twyla, if you can, that'd be great.
yeah, we're getting 33% saying, of course, it's conveniently close.
Wow.
19% say yes, but it's too far away to be something I would use. 26% say, I think I know of one, but I'm not sure if it's the closest. And 22% say, no, I have no idea. So it's pretty even across the board.
Yeah, and I imagine we will come back to this as we get through. Oh, there the results. Great, thank you. I imagine this topic will come back up in our conversations today, but I think it's really helpful to have us all kind of orient ourselves to kind of the current EV infrastructure in Chicago. So thank you for participating in that. And Twyla, if you don't mind, can you also drop the link? Thank you. There's a Department of Energy site here that Twyla just posted in the chat that lets you search by address for the type, number, and proximity of chargers near you. So this might be something you can validate, check yourself, or for those of you who have no idea, that can be a resource for learning where the closest one is to you. All right, so just a quick orientation today before we launch into our speakers. Our session today includes an overview from each of our panelists on design considerations at their level of expertise. So this will include how their perspective interacts with other stakeholders and professionals. We also ask speakers to think about the evolving issues at each of these scales. Kind of what are the feedback loops and the current iterations that are happening, and consider possible takeaways relating to cost and constructability, and also access and equity. As Twyla mentioned, please enter questions you have in the Q&A feature as we go along, and we will use those in our Q&A once we are done with our speakers. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Edith to start us off at the regional scale.
Excellent. Really glad to be here. Thank you so much to everyone who's attending. Super excited with the turnout and really glad to be part of the panel. I'm going to start at the regional level because, as introduced, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus is a regional council of governments. But while we work at a regional level and we have influence and across the Northeast region of Illinois, the work that we're doing is with local governments. So I'll dive into our program called EV Readiness. Next slide, please. So the reason for municipal engagement is because local governments have unique authorities and influence really on everything I work on in sustainability. But on EV charging capacity, there are actions that municipalities can take to accelerate new technology, not that EVs are totally new, but this emerging technology. And that they should do. So the EV readiness program really builds on this capacity. So this list that you're seeing in colors here are the categories in our EV readiness program. And I'm just going to skim through them because we'll take another look at it. But we're at the top of the list, we're looking for municipal commitment. And then as Twyla introduced we have a Greenest Region Compact sustainability pledge, which really leads in that cohesive approach across a regional level where municipalities have made commitments, including to sustainable transportation. Of course, zoning and planning that allows for the new technology to emerge, in this case, EV charging stations, is something that is uniquely under municipal control. And so that's a really important area that we're working on. Municipalities issue permits and also inspect any installation of EV chargers. They are responsible for preparation of their first responders. That's something that we're focusing on. Municipalities control parking and access, parking policy. Building codes then can be done at a state level, but in terms of EV readiness, supervising new construction is done at a local level. Access to EV charging is something that's a little bit more about equity and connecting with transit. So there are policies that municipalities can be helpful on. Municipalities operate fleets, which could be electrified. I say that with a little bit of a caveat, and happy to discuss that, but it's not an area that's easy for municipalities. And then I'm going to skip down to community engagement because municipalities have a unique voice, particularly when you get into the smaller communities, that allows them to educate and engage their communities or their residents. And then utility engagement, market development, and finance are areas where municipalities can be helpful. So this is the sphere of influence. And we thought it was a really good idea to accelerate municipalities' preparedness for transportation electrification through the EV readiness program. So next slide, please. And kind of back to the municipal authorities. Not only do I love this picture, and we're really proud of our work on SolSmart. So this program became the model for the EV readiness program. And SolSmart was about these same municipal strengths and authorities for rooftop solar. The SolSmart program was a national program. It's just relaunched, and communities can still get engaged in that. And it promotes local level best practices along those same categories that we just visited in the previous slide. And the Mayor's Caucus kind of pioneered the approach of doing this work regionally. We work with our Greenest Region Compact communities collaboratively as we can. And pointing to the bar chart on top of the picture, this cohort approach working at a regional level has put Illinois #1 of any state for designated SolSmart communities. And notably, that is ahead of Colorado, states like Colorado and California, which not only are larger, but arguably a little bit more green and progressive than Illinois. So this model really works, and that's why we wanted to pursue it. The elements of the SolSmart program includes a strategic checklist, which guides municipal actions. So really it's a pathway or a roadmap for municipalities. I have to include counties here because the counties were involved as well. What they should do, what they can do to become solar ready. It provided technical assistance to take those actions, a lot of models, training programs, and then it provided tiered recognition. So the recognition levels were SolSmart, bronze, silver, or gold. And that is the model, next slide please, for the new EV readiness program. And your timing is really good for this, to discuss this program. So we created the checklist, and this is just a small snapshot of what the checklist looks like. There are 11 categories, 49 objectives, and 124 actions. And those actions, you just get a little snapshot of what we're focusing on here, high priority areas our zoning, planning, permitting, inspection, safety training, and parking and access, and others that couldn't fit on the slide. But you'll see that little bronze box to the right column. That's the points that go along with that particular action, and the required for designation is earning points towards the bronze designation. So these are prioritized by a committee that we put together that included 71 external stakeholders, including members of the planning community, EV charging industry, IBEW was involved. And so we came up with a really solid list of what should be done. Next slide, please. So the EV readiness program, that list was created. The Joyce Foundation provided funding so that we could go through and create that list. ComEd is now funding the work on leading a first cohort. So we're really in the throes of this program. We just launched in December of last year, and our first 16 communities are we're calling it the learning cohort because we're working out the kinks with the first 16 communities, which is a really impressive and equitable distribution across the Chicago region. Includes one county, Kane County, and the city of Chicago. The rest are suburban communities out as far northwest as Hampshire, Illinois. And they're working through that prioritized list of actions. Our organization, with the help of the Green Ways to Go consulting firm, is providing technical assistance on taking those actions. We're collecting documentation from all program participants and then providing points. We're planning a recognition ceremony, much like, hopefully like you saw in the Soul Smart picture for later this summer. We do have communities that are waiting to join the program. We have the second cohort funded, and we have a wait list for a third cohort, and funding is pending for that. So it's been extraordinarily popular. And then just to kind of close down the focus on the regional level, it's really important that those local actions be taken. But the real strength, I think, in creating robust charging network and a wide adoption of EVs is that collaboration across the region. And with that, I'm happy to turn it back to Sydney.
Great, Edith, thank you. I think this is a great way to think about kind of municipalities setting the stage for EV readiness at the neighborhood and building scales, which is what Jane and Matt will be speaking to next. So I'd like to turn it over to Jane as our next speaker, who will be talking about kind of the application of EV siting a bit more and how it works in practice at the neighborhood scale.
Awesome,
Jane?
thank you, Sydney. And yeah, you can go to the next slide. So I work with cities to develop EV framework plans and really determine an overall approach to evaluating and citing EV charging infrastructure and EV infrastructure as a whole. So this, my version of the presentation is really going to be from my kind of planner's high level perspective about how these projects fit into the larger picture and context. And so, answering the question, essentially, what makes a good network? And I kind of, went through and identified 4 things that, I think are really important in terms of this question. And that's considering the density and distribution of the EV charging stations, the land use that, they're being placed at, the other modes in the greater mobility network, and education. And I'm going to be kind of going through these very quickly throughout my presentation. So if you go to the next slide, the first one is density. And this is a little bit more contextual to give everyone an idea of where we're at. So this is a map of EV charging stations per 100,000 residents in each state. And so, Illinois is currently 29 of 50. We have about 20 charging stations per 100,000 residents, whereas in places where you would associate as having, achieved EV penetration, like California or Vermont, which I was a little surprised by too, they have well over 100. And another thing that's interesting is that in Illinois, less than 1% of registered vehicles are EVs. And JB Pritzker, has a goal of bringing in a lot more EVs by 2040, and that's that's going to be starting to happen soon. So this really will create a potential bottleneck. So one of the biggest issues is going to be, how do we distribute these chargers in an effective and meaningful way? And what does that look like at the neighborhood level? So if you go to the next slide, there really is an opportunity to strategically distribute chargers to more, to really improve access to them in these communities. So this is a map of EV charging stations in Cook County. And we are kind of starting to see concentrations of them, being more so in downtown and the northeast side. But it's important to kind of think about things, think about this distribution and kind of changing the way we think about this and pursuing more equitable approaches. So for example, if there's a land area that is very suburban in nature, that has garages, maybe it has higher income, that really should be more of a low priority when you're thinking about where to invest and prioritize electric vehicles. Conversely, high density multifamily homes, particularly in low income areas, really should be more of a priority, because these areas, these families, they don't have a dedicated space to charge overnight. So that's really something that you want to make sure you're thinking about. Same point with visibility. We need to realize that initially we're not going to have as many charging stations as we need, but ensuring that there's high visibility signage or wayfinding for the stations that are currently there, especially publicly available ones, is really going to increase the awareness and limit range anxiety. Through some of just sharing some of the websites that we've already shared, and make sure that we all know where the charging stations are. And while it's easy to think about prioritizing your own community and immediate area, it's really more about serving your residents and where they might go. Oftentimes that's outside of your community or your neighborhood. So coordinating, as Edith was saying, about coordinating with adjacent neighborhoods or communities to accommodate EV charging stations at key destinations, particularly those that your residents are going to, is going to be really important. And similarly, again, kind of ensuring that people are aware of that. So where those stations are really located, especially nearby. And so the next slide is kind of talking about land use. So it's really important to think about the lived experience of EV users when considering land use. So if you can go to the next slide, this is a graphic that was developed with Muse as we were going through the Cook County plan to kind of ask people, engage them about, where do you want EV charging stations to be located? Where do you see yourself using them? And, there was a lot of feedback about, a gas station, because that's what I use now. And, when we think about land uses for electric vehicles, it's important to kind of think about the fact that unless it's a DC fast charger, which is, less than 10% or 5% of charging stations, you're going to be there for a longer time. And it's important to kind of have a paradigm shift in the way we think about charging. So while, you think of, automatically, oh, there's a gas station. I would pose the question to the group, like, how many times have you been to a gas station and said to yourself, I'd really like to be here for 2 to 3 hours and scope it out? So it's important to think about, where you're going to be for longer. And the placement of EV charging stations really is an economic development opportunity. Not only are you luring people to your village or city, but they are forced to be there for several hours and go shop or eat or walk around. And the presence of EV charging stations is soon going to be seen as an asset for a building or a destination or a planned development. So it's going to be there's going to be a great opportunity to kind of ask yourselves, how can we use this to invest in local businesses and in our community? So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to be talking about other modes. So, taking a step back, the goal overall of putting more EVs on the ground is to decrease our carbon footprint as a society and create more sustainable and equitable world. The most sustainable and equitable way to move people is via mass transit and active transportation. Full stop. Investing in these modes should still be the priority, and EVs should really be more of a tool to get folks around if and when they do need a vehicle, as opposed to kind of the other way around. Yes, we definitely live in a country where people are dependent on cars, and we want to make sure that EVs are accessible, but it is important to keep in mind kind of this hierarchy as we consider placement of EV charging stations and how they interact with the broader mobility network. They are an expensive endeavor, and wherever you place them, they're probably going to be there for 10, 20, maybe 30 years. So if you change the slide, it is important to think to yourself, if a charging station goes here, what is then prevented from going there and impact the community? So ensuring that it's not along a bikeway like this one, or a dedicated bus lane, or an outdoor dining area such as the one behind me. That's, it's going to be a really important part of just, thinking about the entirety of the network. So if you go to the next slide, similarly, there's a lot of discussion about mandating or requiring separate EV spaces for individual land uses in zoning codes. And we're just recently undoing a lot of the wrongs that have come up with cities built on minimum parking requirements, and applying traditional parking mandates to electric vehicle charging by land use risks repeating many of these mistakes. Including that they're not shared among land uses, they're required and difficult to get out of, they're not flexible or catered to the plan development or community preferences. But if you go to the next slide, there's a lot of opportunities to reverse this thinking by developing win-win solutions with transportation and land use, and pursuing EV-ready mandates as opposed to individual requirements, and to allow for buildings to accommodate or retrofit this technology if needed when that time comes, and making sure that they are flexible and are very much catered to the needs of a planned development or community. And then lastly, the next slide, I'm going to talk about education very briefly. Just at the end of the day, awareness generates demand for this, and there's a lot of really exciting programs like the one Edith just went over, but a lot of these tools will not be effective if there's not community awareness. So I would just encourage us all to think about, as we're pursuing these projects, what resources are we making available? Who are we talking to? Who are we not talking to? We really all want the same thing, and making sure we're all on the same page is going to get us there faster and more equitably.
Great, Jane, thank you so much. Having worked with Jane a little bit on some of the Cook County work that she referenced, that education piece is just so important, and I appreciate the awareness generates demand point you made there at the end. Thank you. And now we have Matt, who will speak to how kind of these neighborhood networks and kind of policy, the parking policies of tomorrow, how they're being implemented currently, and kind of how things are looking from an operational standpoint.
Hi, everyone. Yep. Cindy, thank you for having me. Again, Matt Ayers, I'm the account executive for ChargePoint that covers commercial related charging installations in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa. I've been with ChargePoint for just about 2 years. Next slide, please. Graphs like these always kind of, are pretty impressive and pretty incredible to see. I always tell all my customers or stakeholders that I work with that, every year after the Super Bowl, I think it's a good barometer of what the year market's turning to be for electric vehicles, because typically year over year, the Super Bowl commercials have turned from 2 commercials, 6 commercials, 8 commercials. I think 13 commercials were this year about new electric vehicles are coming on the market. So a graph like this, you start to see the market share from now until about 2040 of battery electric vehicles, even plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and the statistics around those about the market for needing to be able to provide charging solutions to those vehicles when they show up in your communities. You're starting to see that, you know, by 2040, greater than 50% of all new vehicles sold in the United States will be fully electric. You see the demand for millennials or you know, new vehicle buyers. Their next vehicle is either going to be a plug-in hybrid or a fully electric vehicle. And then obviously from our point of view, and just to take a look at the industry as a whole, the charging industry as a whole, what we can tell from our network, that every second electric vehicle is plugged in our network. So it's a pretty staggering number. We have the ability for every electric vehicle in the United States, every electric vehicle in North America to plug into our network. So we have a lot of data that we draw from that, and I'll go over that here in a little bit. Next slide, please. Just a little bit background about ChargePoint. If some of the guests are not familiar with us, we're the largest privately owned network in North America. We have over 225,000 ports, and we have roaming agreements with other partners where it allows our ChargePoint members to access 465,000 total ports. We have a comprehensive product portfolio solution for every vertical: multifamily, single family home. We have fleet solutions. We have a whole fleet team that's starting to, you know, cater to the growing demand for fleets as they increasingly meet cost parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. And we are a fully vertically integrated solution. And what I mean by that, and why that's important, is we are a network solution. So we sell software, we manufacture and sell software, the hardware, the charging station itself, the software that the stations operate on, and then services around those. And the big thing with that is that drivers, like with the graphic here, are going to be able to see those stations in real time, whether it's on our app or now being integrated into vehicle infotainment systems. And then station owners are going to be able to see the usage of those stations in real time, making sure they're being operating, how many times people are using them day, week, month, quarter, year. So there's a lot more visibility. And this is sort of another next rendition of the Internet of Things or a connected device that is allowing for a building to be greener, building to be smarter, and for allowing people to provide a really important amenity as more electric vehicles hit the road. Next slide, please. You know, I looking at Edith's EV readiness checklist, we speak to that checklist in a different way with every property owner or a developer or someone that's trying to bring charging as an amenity to their specific area, with the same thing: EV capable, EV ready, looking at the power provided. And we're really looking at, when we're talking with the end customer, is where people are going to typically do the majority of their charging. They're either going to do them at home or they're going to do it at work with the 80% of their charging needs. And then when they're out at the gym, when they're at the movie theater, when they're at restaurants, they're going to be able to top off as well. As Jane mentioned before, we really, in a lot of ways, electric vehicles have most in common with how you utilize plugging in your phone than the traditional drive the vehicle for a week and then go to a depot fueling solution. And that's not to say that the traditional fueling and convenience solution model isn't paying attention to having DC fast charging solutions and charging solutions on their property. They definitely are paying very close attention to large programs like NEVI funding and the corridor programs. But for an electric vehicle owner, and what we see at ChargePoint, you're amenitizing places where people already are and allowing them to charge when they need to, when they can top off, through the terms of dwell time. And obviously the relationship with home and work has changed from before pre-COVID and the pandemic, and how that's changing the way where people work and where they are with their vehicles. But if people can't plug in a multifamily building, and I work with a lot of multifamily operators, and that's a very important piece, as Jane mentioned, they're going to want to be able to plug in their vehicle, again, where they're eating, where they're shopping, where they're working out, or medical offices, wherever they are spending an hour or 2 or 3 or longer to take advantage of charging. And building owners too want to amenitize their parking areas to take advantage of this and provide it as amenity to their workers or their visitors. Next slide, please. When I think with our EV readiness list, and when we're talking with the end customer, I always try to hammer home and make sure people understand and think through, if they're not already an electric vehicle owner or driver, really considering dwell time. The industry that I've worked in when I started at Tesla and working at ChargePoint now, we speak in terms of dwell time. When that car is sitting, does it have the ability to plug in? And I would actually mention too, if you, off the poll at the beginning of this presentation, if you haven't interacted with a charging station, or if you have the ability to go see a charging station, if you're familiar with where it is, or if you ever do see one, go up and see it. I think the best thing to do when people are to learn more about charging or the relationship with an EV driver or the site host is, if someone's there plugged in, ask them how often they go there. I'm kind of a nerd or a wonk for finding EV charging. It's typically off the side of a parking area or to the front of the parking area, just because of the relation of where you're running power from the building to that parking area. Sometimes it's in the very back of the parking spot. But again, it's very nuanced, but I think it's always good to interact with the chargers, see what network it's on. If someone's using it, ask them how easy it is to interact with that station. And I outlined the work, play, and dine in yellow because of the building that we're going to visit and tour at the end of the day today. The kind of tour part of this program, 333 North Green, has all those components in that building. There's retail, there's a gym, there's multiple restaurants, food and beverage options, but there's also, it's a Class A office building that Sterling Bay owns. And while you're working, playing, or dining in the Fulton Market neighborhood, there's plenty of charging solutions in these new Class A buildings that are going up that you can take advantage there. Obviously, as Jane mentioned, you don't want to sit at a gas station or a fueling solution for a long period of time, and people recognize that. So you have larger DC fast solutions that are now coming on market. We have a wide range of DC fast solutions that are going to meet these NEVI requirements at the state, federal level. And this part of the product portfolio for probably every company across the industry is evolving very quickly, a lot more power, so people can charge in parity to that traditional fueling and convenience solution if you need to do that. If you're on a long trip from Chicago to Springfield to St. Louis up to Madison, Wisconsin, you can quickly stop at a Hy-Vee or a Quick Trip or a Casey's and fuel your vehicle, use the restroom, grab a coffee, go to the bathroom, get back in the car, and you're on your way. You don't want to be sitting there forever. And then when you're at your final destination, like a hotel, where the car's going to be sitting for 8, 10, 12 hours while you recharge, the car should be recharging too. That's how we think of in terms of these. Next slide, please. Just again, to talk about ChargePoint, I think most people interact with the ChargePoint CT4000. That's our bread and butter station. That's the typical commercial station, which most people see in the public or have seen over the years, probably been out for 7, 8 years. We have a whole variety of solutions on the AC side, starting at a home station for people that do have single family homes. And people, because of that, are very familiar with our network. When people buy Hyundais or Mercedes or Lexus vehicles or Toyotas, a lot of times those vehicles come with that station at the dealer level or in the vehicle as they ride home. So they're already familiar with our network. Most electric vehicle owners are familiar with our network. And again, we have roaming agreements. And we're starting to build out this solution on the AC side for dedicated fleets. I think a lot of electricians, just in our line of business, they want to walk the walk and they want to talk the talk. So as they're trying to work with multiple stakeholders and install stations, they want to start quickly transitioning their fleet of vans or trucks over to Illinois-made Rivians or Ford F-150s or Express Transit vans. So that CPF50 is that station for that. We have a higher amped commercial stations that are coming out towards the end of this year. And we have, again, a wide variety of level 3 DC fast solutions. The whole, bringing this holistically, we have a network on the driver side that it's easy to find these stations. And then on the station owner side, we have services, we have API integration, we have easy billing structure so you can monetize and provide charging as a revenue model for people. And it's a single platform. So if you have a large Fortune 500 company that has fleet stations, they have commercial stations, they have workplace stations, which many of my customers do, they can see all that in real time in a dashboard. Next slide, please. I just wanted to point this out real quick. This is the station that's installed at 333 North Green that we'll see later tonight. Just want to say, again, this is our bread and butter, comes in multiple varieties. You've probably seen this all over the Chicagoland area in Illinois. Again, we'll go over this more later tonight, but just want to point that out. Next slide, please. And as EV ready codes are expanding, this is very exciting to see as more codes come into law on the state side. And in Chicago, we, again, Edith and her organization's large framework, we start to speak with people at the site level, at the property portfolio level, of saying, what are the capabilities at this parking space or at this property? How can we get as much use out of these spaces as possible? To Jane's point, we have a lot of customers that during the day, it is specific to the property or it's specific to the entity that owns those stations. And then at night, they open them up to the public. It's a different pricing policy and different people in the community can use those stations. I think a perfect example of that, or a good use case of that, are schools and community centers, libraries, different areas where the entity is using that during the day, but at night, if there's someone in the community that needs a charger that may not have it at a single family home that they're visiting with an EV, they should be able to use those stations easily and take full advantage of them so that other stakeholders in the community can use them. We obviously talk about once buildings are either built that are EV ready, growing into that building. We talk about a lot about the buildings that are being built around the city. If something's EV ready, if there's enough power there and there's conduit run, and then you're growing into those spots. So EV capable would be that the building has enough power there, or the building is built with the capability to put chargers in. EV ready is that there's conduit run and that you're ready to start putting ports in or installing stations as more EVs show up. And I think this education piece that we just talked about too, with multiple stakeholders and to the building developer or owner specifically, is always talking about how you can grow into the solution, try to provide as many ports as possible with managing the power as available, which I'll talk about in a little bit more. And then obviously the end of this, once these codes are enforced, making sure that you have EV chargers installed for new buildings, for new parking structures, so that people know that they're there. There are plenty of times where people have chargers installed in buildings. I won't name specific names, but no one knows that they're in the building. If it's not a network solution, it's not on our app or someone's app. It's very hard for someone not to know if there wasn't a sign or kind of just making sure people are familiar in that community that there's chargers available there. Next slide, please. With a network solution and a connected device, that what we sell with our software and hardware, you have the ability to save on installation costs through these codes by managing power at the panel, sharing power at the circuit, or sharing power across stations to help save costs on the installation. And again, expand the power available out to as many ports as possible, so as many people can plug in to meet that mandatory minimum or meet the code requirement. So I always liken it to making sure that there's just plenty of places for people to charge. And again, everybody typically thinks they need the fastest charger, they need as much power available as possible, but you can do unique things with software with our type of equipment, other network solutions, where you can do first in, first out. You can do a round robin feature. You can, allow the equipment to share power. If I show up at 80% and Edith shows up with a vehicle at 20%, power is distributed appropriately to Edith's vehicle, so that the chargers and power recognize that her vehicle needs more power. So we can do these things. We have teams for this. I believe that a lot of companies and equipment in the industry are going to have to catch up, if not already, be designed to meet these code requirements, to power share, to report, et cetera, make sure they have quantifiable uptime, make sure the stations are working. Next slide, please. And I like to just give just a photo, understanding how we can do different types of power sharing examples, whether it be from charger to charger, power sharing off the transformer, or power sharing off of the panel or the circuit specifically. Again, you're trying to take whatever power is available, managing your installation costs, not bringing more power, a substantial amount of money to bring more power to the building or the property, and try to provide as much charging to as many people as possible by managing power at the panel with software. That's the end of my presentation. Again, thank you for having me.
Great, Matt. Thank you. I am not a building, designer not at the building scale. But I appreciate all of the kind of detail you included about how that looks at the building scale. And, all of these EV solutions at all of these scales are iterative and nuanced, and things are changing very quickly, and they all have to work together, kind of to drive EV adoption. And I think even with all of the experts on the line, this process is still kind of, confusing and being worked out as we go along. And so I kind of wanted to use that as kind of a launching point to get us into our Q&A, since we have some great questions coming in. And I had a couple, but I think I'm just going to jump straight to what folks are chiming in with. And again, thank you very much to all of our panelists and to everybody who is submitting questions. Please continue to do so. And anything we don't answer, we will address and send out in a Q&A after the session. So in our kind of continuing our learning, Edith, I might pose the first question to you about, are there any updates on the Illinois EPA charging incentive program or Illinois NEVI, NEVI programs, and when they might be enacted?
And that's a great question. Happy to talk about that a little bit, because I'm working on an aggregated grant application for the charging fueling infrastructure program. And just to break it down into the types of funding sources, so there are tax credits and rebates that have been available periodically from state of Illinois. Those are sort of a first come, first serve. There's federal tax credits, which maybe Matt can talk about a little bit more. But on the NEVI program, or the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, there are two major sources of funding that are coming out. And the federal government has come out with a goal of a national coast-to-coast network of EV charging, so that you can travel cross-country and between states. And so the focus is on corridor charging, and states are required to submit a plan for implementing the corridor charging. And Illinois Department of Transportation has been working on that for a while, a couple of years, and they have prioritized working with the federal government, federally designated alternate fuel corridors, and the funding will focus on publicly accessible chargers along those corridors. There's a plan in place. The funding is not released yet. I'm going to ask Matt to correct me if he has any other insights onto this one. But the second major bucket is the discretionary grant program that is competitive. And if I didn't say it, each state is developing a plan. They're awarded funds. It's not competitive. So Illinois has funds to work with, and they will be making investments in mostly high-speed chargers or DC fast chargers along corridors. There is currently open a competitive charging and fueling infrastructure program at the federal level. And I have to say that program came out maybe 5-6 weeks ago. It was supposed to be request for proposals was due this week, and they extended it. It was a little frustrating to see the application come out with the floor, meaning the minimum grant request was $500,000 for local governments and a few other public entities to apply for, requiring a partnership with private firms, private vendors in some cases, maximum grant of $15 million. And really that smallest level grant excluded a lot of the communities that I work with. If you're looking at putting in even a single DC fast charger, you're not going to get to $500,000, not to mention it's a lot of work. And then if you're putting it level 2s or you're a small community, you can't even really get in the game. So I'm working with the Illinois Finance Authority and then the EV Ready cohort communities to put in an aggregated application. It's due June 13th. So that's the status. The funding will flow. I mean, it's just his impression. Dan said he was a policy wonk, but I've been in the public sector for a long time, and I've never seen money fly out the door so quickly, at least on the federal level. So I don't know, Matt, if you have any thing to add to that, if you have more knowledge of the program.
I think that's correct. I think
Okay.
There's been broad I would echo everything you said. I think there's been a little bit of some broad frustration at the tiny window of the CFI grant that was out 5 weeks ago and then extended, and the requirements of it. A lot of these federal grants or just state grants, and not to insult anyone here, just sometimes are incredibly vague. And you need as many people like Edith as possible to help work through these programs. And we get a lot of questions about this when these programs open up. The NEVI programs are they're alternative fuel corridors. They're very prescriptive. So they kind of look at these ink blots on a map of where they want to put stations. It's every 50 miles on the corridor, and then it's a mile off the corridor. So you have to find places where people are prescriptive in those spots. Then it comes down to the site level of saying, hey, we have different partners that are interested in applying for these grants in every state, but what's the buildability look like at this specific spot, a mile off the corridor, off the off ramp? And then to someone's question in the Q&A, talking about buildability of traditional fueling convenience locations, a lot of those companies are starting to wake up to those funds and have been waiting for those funds to really provide, the equivalent of the traditional fueling convenience model on one side of the store to electric vehicle charging stations on the other side of the store, for this to help pencil out and to provide, to use their sites to win on some of these opportunities. So, yeah, Edith, I agree with everything you said there.
Great. Thank you, guys. I wanted to ask a question, kind of a cumulative question I've been seeing in a variety of different sub questions, just around the visibility issue. I think it helps with the paradigm shift for folks to see these charging stations and to be able to understand kind of where they are. And I think visibility at each of the scales looks a little different. Edith, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on the, your caveat to municipal fleet electrification. I think some folks might see that as a way to, show visibility of, a municipality's commitment to electrification. And so if that might be difficult, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think it speaks to each of you, because Jane, you mentioned having signage on the street, as an important component to show community, participants where these charging stations are, and that might look, different at your scale. And then, Matt, as well, you mentioned, being able to see an app and showing where these chargers are. That's really helpful if you're already an EV driver, but if you aren't, and, for example, I don't own an EV, but I'm super curious and paying attention to these things, and it's still not super visible to me as just a member of the Chicago community. And so I was hoping that maybe each of you could speak to that visibility point a little bit at your scales.
I'll let Edith or Jane go ahead.
And that's a great question. And so just to speak to the visibility question on a couple of different levels, it's really important that there is awareness and appreciation for EVs in order to drive adoption. So first, just kind of looking at the EV readiness, that's one thing that our local governments are super excited to earn that designation. And that's something that we recognize and promote. So just having the policies in place, just to jump back to SolSmart for a second, when the solar developers sort of connected with SolSmart communities, it made it faster, easier, and cheaper to go solar. And one of the communities Schaumburg saw a 24,000% increase in the number of solar installations. I mean, it's not going to be that crazy with EVs, but that idea of, being sort of opening doors and being ready for EV infrastructure development is an area of visibility that we can address. I'll talk very briefly about the fleet challenge that we have. And fleets are really a great place to electrify with certain conditions. And part of it has to do with the adequate mileage demands, and then predictability in how you use vehicles. So when you've got delivery vehicles, that's why Amazon is doing it. It's great. It's got a home charging domicile, and you come back with predictable routes, and you can charge and you can build infrastructure around that. The nature of municipal fleets, thinking past transit vehicles, because I'm going to exclude them just because my municipalities don't operate transit. This is, if you're thinking of every municipality operates essential services, and they don't put a lot of miles on. In the same predictable way, municipalities usually have a small boundary. Even with Chicago, with a larger boundary, the private and public sector fleets just don't add miles to justify the conversion and investment in the EVs or a new technology. You still, if you've got snow plowing services and emergency service that you need to respond to, you need to have your charger ready for emergencies. And if you're installing level 2 charging, you can't guarantee that you're going to be ready to go out and plow snow in the short period of time. And to invest in a DC fast charger for a municipal fleet doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just not where the return is. The areas where we do put a lot of miles on vehicles are police vehicles, but those are in operation almost constantly. So there's really no downtime. You'd have to double your fleet in order to set aside a vehicle or alter your schedule to set aside a vehicle to have it ready, you know, and charged when it needs to go. So it's just kind of the size and predictability, and then the, you know, the nature and mix of fleets that we have in our, or vehicles that we have in our fleets. One area that we see municipalities moving ahead is just the administrative vehicles, which are somewhat visible driving around communities providing services. So it's a frustration for us. That's why we went to EV readiness, to be perfectly honest, because we did not have success in transitioning to cleaner fleets in any big way.
Thank you, Edith. Matt or Jane, did you want to speak to that? I know we just have a couple more minutes, so any comments on that question?
Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, I mean, I think I addressed a lot of this stuff in my slide deck too, but I would just echo, you know, you think to yourself, at what point will you think, you know, maybe even Sydney, since she doesn't have an EV yet, you know, when is it going to be so ubiquitous? At what point that you say to yourself, I'm ready to get one because it's really there? And, you know, what communication channels do you use to become aware of things? You know, it's not just a matter of having signage on the street. It's not just a matter of having the app. It's a matter of having all these different resources consistently and reliably available and functioning, and you're seeing them function and you're hearing about them from other people to really increase visibility and increase adoption. I would also just kind of, you know, I do come from a little bit of a parking background, and there's a lot of times that we struggle to work with communities on just telling people that there are available spaces in a lot that's across the street or around the corner. And, you know, applying that to electric vehicle charging stations, you know, at a macro level, like how often do you circle the block and you're not able to find parking? So, you know, signage and wayfinding is a constant struggle with municipalities and networks all over the place. So it's really just the more opportunities you can think of and that you can, you know, get feedback from people and informing you where they look and how and what's most convenient for them, the better.
I would just simply add that with a network solution, right? I think a lot of the industry is going to go, if it hasn't started going there already on the EV charging side of the industry. I think there is going to be a ton of investment in the vehicle, in the infotainment system of the vehicle is kind of where this next 10-year period of they kind of call it the third space or the fourth space. So you're not at home, you're not at work, you're not at your office, you're kind of doing a lot of things inside the future of these new electric vehicles. And a large of that is providing you with information. Obviously, getting this whole discussion about autonomous vehicles and where they need to go plug in and charge, but finding information on network solutions are very easy on the app, which we've always utilized. But now that information is being provided into the infotainment system of the vehicle, where these chargers are telling vehicles in real time where they are. The vehicles are looking for and can on the map in real time tell you where chargers are. Tesla does a very good job of that because Tesla owns the vehicles. They own the relationship in between the vehicles, the hardware, and the chargers and that software. So as you're driving and it's 2 degrees out, it's constantly telling you where the closest chargers are. And I think the whole entire industry is going to get to that. So there's never a time where you're in an area where you shouldn't be able to find chargers. And hopefully you can find chargers that are available, functioning, working, and open in real time.
Yeah. Thank you guys. I know I see some questions about kind of the operation. You know, I see this charger, but I don't know if it's broken or not, things like that. I think that's a great segue Maybe folks can join us at the tour this afternoon or this evening and talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to turn it over to Twyla to share a bit of the details about that and close us out for today.
Yeah, thank you all for attending. We've reached our time today, but we will hopefully get some more responses to your questions that we can send in our follow-up email, which will also include other resources and a copy of the slides and the recording of this webinar. And yes, if you signed up for our in-person EV charging station tour, we will see you later today at 333 North Green at 5:30 p.m. And we'll get to see the charging station, the electrical closet, and hear a little bit more about how it all works. Thank you all for joining and have a great day. Thank you, panelists.